What follows now is a film which was recorded with Rachel Whiteread in conversation with Ann Gallagher a couple of days ago. And in it, they discuss the catalogue raisonné which Ann is working on. Rachel Whiteread, I'm sure, requires no introduction to anyone here. She's been one of the most important artists in this country since at least the early 1990s and has had exhibitions all around the world ever since. Ann also, it shouldn't need any introduction here. She worked at the British Council for many years and then at the Tate, from which she recently retired a few years ago. Ann has known Rachel for many years. She curated Rachel's Venice Biennale show in the late 1990s. She then curated a touring show in the early 2000s, and then most recently the Tate exhibition in 2017, which toured until 2019. So she is more than qualified to write the catalogue raisonné, and I will now hand over for the film to start. Thank you.
We first began this conversation about compiling a catalogue raisonné when we were working together on your Tate exhibition, which opened in 2017. For you, was it a logical step to move on to a catalogue raisonné after a mid-career retrospective?
Yeah, I think there's a certain thing that happens when you do a sort of mid-career retrospective and you start to think about your sort of past and your history and and all of this sort of stuff comes up. And I think, the logical thing is to somehow try and put it in order and to sort of take stock of it and to sort of, it's a bit like in a library where you used to have those, old cards that you'd look through. It's just a way of, even though we have it to some degree in the studio, you really lose track. If you sell work, you completely lose track of where things go, because people buy things and they sell things and they, keep things and they don't register them. And, and it's really hard to know what happens to all your work. So
it's like a card indexed of your career.
Yes, exactly. And I think, that there's, I don't think an artist could ever do their own catalogue raisonné because there is, there's a lot of sort of emotional triggers that go with it. And you see, from 1988, I think is the first piece in the catalogue raisonné, from there and going through to sort of 2022 or however long, when we finally publish it, what date that will be. You've had, major milestones have happened throughout that time. And, lots of blips and, and it is a way of just sort of organizing it all and making sort of sense of it all, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I tend to think of the processes of working on exhibitions with you, which I've done a few times, is slightly different from this because you've always been very involved in the concept of an exhibition. You're very hands-on about the installation and the look of the space and everything. And I know that we have discussed quite closely with you the shape and the format of what the catalogue raisonné will be. But then there's a long period where it's just collecting facts and detective work.
Yeah, I mean, we had a session the other day after working on the curation of an exhibition. So we had a couple of hours doing that, which was very interesting. I was really engaged with. And then we got to the sort of, looking at this list of things that, you have incredibly patiently, you and your assistant have incredibly patiently sort of worked through and put these things, put these things in order and to try and work out where things are and, who owns them now. And, for me, it's an incredible honor to have someone do that for me because I wouldn't have the patience and wouldn't want to do it, because it does send you down so many different roads. And I know that, that you need to use my memory whilst it's still relatively fresh, to try and remember what happened to certain things. Because, in my career, unfortunately, I've had a couple of, breakups with galleries that were quite complex and not necessarily that honest, and it was hard to work out what had happened to a number of things. And still, we don't know, actually. I don't know if that will become clearer as we go on. But it's, it's you are playing detectives, which I think is something that you're actually quite enjoying. And
I am, but I feel like it's incredibly important to do this at this stage in your career so that we have the benefit of your insight and your memory, even if it doesn't remember absolutely everything.
Yeah, and it certainly doesn't. I mean, I think, we've worked, as you say, we've worked together many times on things. So, I think it would be quite hard to have this relationship of doing this if you didn't personally know someone.
Yeah.
Because there are so many sort of triggers involved and stuff, and you're incredibly sensitive to all that because you've known me for 30 years.
Yeah.
So and we've worked very closely on, I can't remember how many shows now. So I think it's an honor actually to have these, to have this at this stage, and necessary, and the beginning of a long process. I imagine, I'm hoping to work for a good few more decades, and that's trying to keep these things in some sort of semblance of order, and I hope I have some sort of legacy, as a British artist and European and international artist, and that this document will be of use to sort of curators and museums and institutions later on. So it's about leaving a legacy. It's about thinking about legacy, actually.
Yeah. Certainly one of my motivations in wanting to do this was thinking how marvelous it would have been if it had existed when we were planning the retrospective.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I think it would be incredibly important. What I find really interesting is sometimes when you don't remember perhaps exactly the answer to a question, but you remember something slightly associated with it that allows me to go and follow another lead. And that's
actually that's really interesting, actually, because you have such a broad interest and experience of the art world, and have worked in many different sort of capacities within the art world. So you really do know how to negotiate a lot of different avenues, and how to, because a lot of galleries and a lot of well, not so much galleries, but collect, it's sort of private information when people buy these things, because they become theirs, and they may not want to let people know, where they belong, where they're from, who owns them now.
And obviously you have to respect that.
Yes, and and then you obviously put that in the catalogue. But I think for galleries, they have a kind of a contract with their clients that they can't just give out their information.
No, absolutely.
So it's a sort of complicated human process as well, actually.
Often coming down to just individuals.
Yes,
and what they're willing to share.
Yeah, and then maybe if there's something that we really want to be able to sort of showcase or whatever within the catalogue, then maybe talk to them and see, and give, as you say, it's very much about the individual, and I think we'll see. I mean, as it goes on.
Exactly. So you talked about your galleries, and they have been incredibly helpful in providing lots of information. But we've also needed to look back on your records, and obviously there's your database, but we've even gone back to original paper files that you compiled in the early days. So I just wanted to ask you, what prompted you to keep those sort of records? Did you do it from the beginning, or is it
when you're at art school, I mean, I'm sure they probably teach it a bit now at art school, but when I was at art school, there was no guidance whatsoever about, most people weren't expected to carry on being artists. It was just that you went and did a fine art degree, and then it set you up for so many different things in life, because you teach yourself. But from learning accounts or doing any of those things when you first left college, you were very much just sort of left on your own to figure it out. And I remember just scribbling on bits of paper and stuff and thinking, I better keep that, and just, sticking a couple of holes in it and putting it in a file. And I did do that early on. And actually it's something, if something sort of disastrous happens to something, or, there's some sort of special reason, I will try and put it back in the paper file. And I keep files still for everything, just to have a sort of numerical system, because for me, the fact that everything's in the cloud, what's the cloud?
We'll come on to that later.
But, for me, I am a child of we didn't have a computer at my school, so, and I'm not that old, other schools had them, but, I think there was one in the maths department. So I never grew up with that sort of technology. So for me, those things are still important. And actually, I think, in the way that LPs have come back, I think that those things, there's nothing like the feel of something to impregnate it in your memory. It's a very different process to seeing something digitally, I think. And that's because you're using two senses. You're using your touch and feel and smell, actually, three senses, and or you're just doing it, tapping away at a computer.
Well, it's probably a good moment to ask you about paper versus digital for a catalogue raisonné. What's your preference?
My preference is both.
But that's interesting, because you've moved, because initially you just definitely wanted a book. The feel of a book.
I definitely want the feel of a book, but obviously a book can't be updated as quickly as a digital format can be. And and obviously institutions, catalogue raisonnés can be very expensive. A lot of places won't have these things physically. I mean, some will, because libraries are closing down, and taking a different, becoming a different sort of format within institutions. So, but I do know that a lot of people like that, prefer to look something up physically in a book than they do looking it up on a computer, for those reasons that I've talked about. So, but also people at curatorial school now will be just learning from the cloud and digitally, so I mean, I think it's a sort of question really that you need to ask the people that are learning these skills now, and if they would find a book useful. But whenever I see a student or someone comes to do something or whatever, and I may give them a book, or they're always delighted. It's like if I gave them a disc or a hard, something that I've just stuck in, they wouldn't be so chuffed.
I mean, I think both is a good place to be at the moment. We've still got some time to go. Obviously, when a work leaves your studio, the capacity to write little notes about it stops, and the sort of information that we're uncovering now has happened subsequently, and it's not something you would necessarily know. But what's it like to be reminded of this later history of each work?
I mean, it can be things like sometimes you kind of block things out because something's happened, there's been an accident, or it's been, crushed in a warehouse, or, there was a fire at Momart where things were destroyed, so things that are destroyed, sometimes something might happen to a piece, and the collector will go straight to the insurance company, and then the insurance company will try and mend it in some way, and then I have to sort of approve of the mend, and if I don't, they still might sell it on, and they don't work, I mean, I don't know how awful that is, but there are things that have happened with some works, and that can be very upsetting, because you just think this just
so a work you thought that was no longer in the world because it's not as you would have it, you find out has actually gone on to have a longer life. And things like the Momart fire, I think that did rather upset you to think about that.
I mean, I didn't have, I think there were 2 things that were destroyed in it, and Yeah, I mean, for me, it wasn't so upsetting because, but I think as a whole for the sort of YBAs, there was a lot of work in there that went up in smoke. And I mean, I think some things were remade, people remade them, but it's not the same to remake a work.
I mean, I know that from the beginning, we thought this project should be confined to sculpture because obviously that's the majority of your work. But could you talk a little bit about how you feel about that, concentrating more on the sculpture than drawings, which is also a really important part of your practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I hope that maybe we will do a sort of similar thing with drawings at some point. But, I think drawings can be replicated in a kind of easier way in books. So, if I could always publish, books about drawings and there would be a sort of similar thing. But for me, drawings are so much a part of my practice. I don't really see the sculpture and drawing as two different things. And there's an awful lot of drawings that I make that are very sculptural and they're in very deep frames and, so I think when that happens, there is a point where maybe some things I need to start calling sculptures, rather than drawings, and then they find a way in, because some of my sculptures are 5 centimeters deep and the drawing might be 15 centimeters deep. So you kind of think, well, hang on, which is which here, because they both lean against the wall or hang on the wall or whatever.
I mean, I guess we've concentrated first on the sculptures because, particularly with your public projects, that's so much part of what at least the early part of your career was about. And in a way, those are the things that left and went in different directions and that you don't have records of necessarily. Whereas I think drawings you showed rarely in the beginning of your career and sold also rarely until relatively recently. So the records are probably much more intact.
Except with the first drawing show that I did, which was at the DA, when I did a DAD in 1993, I think it was, when I lived in Berlin for a year and a half. And the curator very sweetly sent me all of the what were 5x4s of transparencies of each image, and he just sent it in the regular post and it just disappeared. And so it's thousands of pounds worth of photography just gone. And a number of those drawings had sold, and we didn't have proper.
And that was the only record.
It was the only record, so things like that happen, but you just have to shrug and take it on the chin. Not much else you can do.
Well, that's obviously one of the major tasks for that exercise when it comes around. Just thinking about legacy as a whole, how is it for an artist to think about that? How much do you care? What do you want people to remember about you?
I mean, I think, something happened to me quite early on in my career when I made House. It was in 1993, and I never expected House to be permanent, but I never expected the response that it had either. And it was a really key work, I think, for many people, and and for what kind of art is, and how art can sit in the street, and what sort of somewhere between a kind of installation and sculpture, and something that's very site specific, and it really did center my practice on not the sort of sculptural studio practice, but the sort of public sculpture work. And I made, after that, I thought I want to carry on making buildings. I'm really interested in doing that, but I have to find a way of making that happen that can be permanent and not have such a hoo-ha around it. So I decided I wanted to make these pieces that I call shy sculptures, and which I'm trying to make wherever I can in the world, in the landscape. And for me to do that became a very important part of my legacy, and knowing that these are going to exist for a long time, way after my death and my children's death, you know, they'll be there for a long time. And I think that that's something that I know that I've laid down.
Yeah.
And I will make a book, and I will put it on the cloud, and I will, you know, do all sorts of things with it. But I want to make a few more before I start doing that. So, you know, I think that was one way of solving a part of my legacy.
Yeah.
You know, another thing that I do is, you know, I think I try and, I make work in groups, and I often make a number of pieces, say maybe using the same mold and sort of changing it slightly, or you know, painting it or doing something else to it, putting a different patina on it. And, you know, that in a way, it's almost like, you know, well, if no one sees that, then they'll see that. And it's not, you know, you know, I suppose it's a little bit like not making editions all the time, nothing like that, but making it so that there is the type, you can see the type of work, and that I think also becomes part of legacy, that there's a sort of, you know, if there's another show in, you know, way after I'm dead, that people will be able to find, it's not going to be this sort of single work that is just going to be the thing that can never be seen again. You know, so
yeah, and you have been incredibly consistent in that way in working through different groups of works, which has made it, in a way, incredibly easy to structure the catalogue raisonné, in that we have bodies of work that we can group together.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in 20 years ago, I made a show called Floors, Doors, you know, Ceilings and Walls, I think it was, you know. So, and on each floor of the gallery in Bregent's, I put the work that sort of, and that was a very nice way of sort of, you know, explaining kind of what I do. And you know, so I think you know, it's never been something that I've been obsessed with by any means, but it's maybe something that's always been kind of a little bit at the back of my mind. And I think, you know, that maybe comes from very early success and having you know, some very serious places collecting my work quite early on. And you kind of think, well, maybe, you know, I will exist after my death, and people will be interested in what I do, you know.
But I think that's probably a useful point to stop, and if anyone has any questions, they can ask afterwards.
So Anne and I are just going to talk for a few minutes, and then we will stop at 1. And if we're lucky, we may have time for some questions from the audience. And that was an extremely informative film. I am conscious, having worked on catalogue raisonnés where the artists have been dead, that you're working with something quite different to what I've worked with. And there are pitfalls within that and enormous advantages as well. Can I ask you, first of all, it seems to me one of the basic things that you have is trust. There's a trust between the two of you, which seems to be very important. Comes with that, I should imagine, a fairly open conversation about the red lines that are involved on either side. Can you tell us about those?
Yes, I mean, as I think we explained in the film, we talked a lot about the parameters and the format and the way we were going to proceed with the catalogue raisonné. And then Rachel more or less said, don't bother me unless you have to. And that's absolutely fine. It's worked really well. And how it's panned out is that she can't help with the location of things. She can't help with the exhibition history, apart from lending us a catalogue if we can't source it. So we really have to get on with that detective work ourselves and, fill in all the gaps and use other sources. But those niggling little things that I know drive her insane when I explain them to her, like when a work has suddenly changed title over time, or the date has changed and she can't understand how it could have happened. But if you go back slowly and logically work out what might have happened, I think it has to be her decision, because she's here, to adjudicate if I can provide a variety of options. And that's how we're finding it's working. That if she doesn't need to be involved, don't involve her. But there are certain things that are the artist's decision to make, I think.
Yeah. One issue that seemed to be touched on in the film was the question of these works which have been damaged and repaired.
Yeah.
How are you dealing with that in the catalogue raisonné, and how is she accepting that or not?
But I guess when a work leaves the studio, it goes out into the world and it's sort of tick off, it's gone. But if in an artist's mind a work has been damaged, that means it doesn't exist anymore and they don't want it to exist anymore. But for the purpose of a catalogue raisonné, we have to record those facts. And that's something that perhaps is more surprising to an artist, that because it's been out in the world, it can't just be ignored because it's been damaged and destroyed.
And she accepts that principle.
Yeah, I mean, those are the things that over time get negotiated as you come across them.
Yeah.
And hopefully there are not too many instances like that. But all sorts of things that are irrelevant for the studio once the work is gone are not irrelevant to the catalogue raisonné.
Yeah. So you find yourself in the privileged position of working with an internationally respected artist, showing all over the world a lot of the time.
Yeah.
She's extremely busy.
Yeah.
Her studio is, I imagine, also extremely busy. And you are running a project which needs both of them. How do you organize the sort of practicalities of getting the time and ensuring that you have constructive meetings?
I mean, obviously, I'm really aware that if Rachel's in a stress period, the last thing she wants to talk about is different dates.
Yeah.
So I will not push her if I know she's having a difficult time or on a roll with a body of work. So I've often, because I'm working with her on other projects, more curatorial projects, I try and slot in a day or an afternoon where we do as much as we possibly can. And I have a huge advantage in that she stole my personal assistant from the Tate. He's now working for her.
Right.
So we have a very good relationship.
Right.
And as a team, we can make things happen without putting Rachel under stress.
So how big is your team?
I'm working with Kira Weinstein, who's assisting me on the catalogue raisonné, and she's also working as a researcher at Tate Modern. And then Aisling Roycroft is Rachel's assistant in the studio, and we're all sort of together in touch about everything.
Right.
And of course, the 3 galleries are also very, very important in providing us information.
Yeah.
That of course everything has to be double and triple checked, but great leads have come from the galleries.
Yeah. You mentioned that when you were doing the Tate exhibition in 2017, how useful it would have been to have a catalogue raisonné.
Yeah.
So that sort of leads me on to the question of, what are you learning about Rachel's work while you're doing this that you didn't know already?
Yeah. I mean, why I would have wanted a catalogue raisonné to exist while selecting a retrospective is that even I, who have known Rachel since before she had a gallery, and think I've seen almost every body of work, when you start to look at her career, you realise that you haven't quite got the pattern of it.
Yeah.
And a catalogue raisonné just shows you, out of 200 works, how many were in this period, how much focused on one thing and one another. And that would have been incredibly useful to sort of conceptualize an exhibition. And I think for future curators, a catalogue raisonné will be incredibly useful.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions? Yeah, no, good. We're going to be on time. Okay, well, look, thank you. Oh, yes.
We are using very basic software at the moment until we make a decision about whether we are going to do an online and book or, yeah.
They do different things, right? One is the work in progress and the other is a snapshot of the work in progress.
Yes, exactly. And as Rachel said, having both would be amazing. In which case things are transferred into very simple Word documents, but we're keeping endless spreadsheets as well. And hopefully if we then go down the digital route, that information can easily be transferred. And then perhaps updated by the studio in the future, by Rachel's children in future, I don't know, but that would be the ideal.
Okay, thank you. We are very tight for time, so I'm afraid we're going to have to bring that to an end. But I'd just like to thank Anne for coming today and extend our thanks to Rachel as well for agreeing to this conversation. And I wish you the best of luck with the catalogue raisonné.